Hello, welcome to episode 52. I hope you're having a good week, and if you had half term last week, I hope you all survived. I survived a rainy half term with 3 kids, one of whom had a birthday party, which is my kryptonite. So they're back in schools today, and I'm back on the podcast today. We've had a little bit of an update and a switch around of our Patreon tiers. So go and check them out. There'll be a link in the bottom of the description box for the podcast, so you can go and have a look. If you want to listen to episodes ad-free, you can over on Patreon, etc. So there's lots of extra bits and bobs. And I'm also going to be doing a few mini-sodes over there because there are quite a few of you who have requested haunted places near you, which I love, but sometimes they may be a little bit short for a full episode, but I'm going to be doing them as mini-sodes on the Patreon. So go and have a look. I've just had the Queen's Platinum Jubilee here in the UK, so pip pip, etc. for that. But today we are in Yorkshire, and we are going to talk about 30 East Drive. And we're going way back to August 1966, and we're in a place called Pontefract, which I think is possibly one of my favourite place names. Very British. Pontefract, West Yorkshire, and the Pritchard family, Jean, Joe, 15-year-old Philip and 12-year-old Diane, have just moved into 30 East Drive in the Chequerfield estate. Now, Jean and Joe go away for the August bank holiday, and Philip and his grandmother, who is looking after the kids, are kind of sorting the house out, getting the house clean, ready for their return. And whilst in the hallway, both see a fine layer of chalk-like dust falling not from the ceiling, but from a level below head height. So Philip's grandmother calls her daughter, Philip's aunt, to come and see what's going on. And the daughter then goes into the kitchen to get some stuff to clean up the dust. But she slips on a pool of water that's appeared on the kitchen floor, and naturally she goes to mop up the pool of water thinking nothing of it. But more pools keep appearing on the linoleum in front of her and Philip's eyes. So this is the first indicators that something is not quite right in the house. And it's just the beginning of what would be several years of incredible, inexplicable events. Green foam appears from the taps and the loo. Even when they've had the water switched off, they've assumed it's a problem with the water coming into the house. So they have the water switched off to examine the pipes, but the green foam carries on coming out. Lights are turned on and off. Plants leap out of their pots and sort of land on the stairs. Cupboards shake violently. Photographs are slashed with a sharp knife. And there's an endless list of levitating and thrown objects, including a solid oak sideboard and a heavy clock, which gets thrown down the stairs. It would become so terrifying and violent that the family would eventually move out. So they originally start referring to the poltergeist as Fred, and when the local press get hold of the story in 1968, they call it Mr. Nobody. But they still carry on calling it Fred. And originally the family, especially Jean, refused to even countenance moving out. But Fred also showed similar reluctance and was really unhappy with any attempts to encourage his departure. Exorcisms were met with indignation. Walls would seep with water, faces were slapped, people were shoved down the stairs, and Fred's hands at one point apparently appeared out of nowhere conducting the Christian songs that were aimed at getting rid of him. And he allegedly was wearing huge women's fur gloves. It's also not always violent. It doesn't start off violent. Fred would sometimes be quite funny. So they have a skeptical aunt visiting, and Fred allegedly pours an entire jug of milk he'd removed from the fridge over her head, leaving the children in hysterics. And then there is this sort of 2-year hiatus. No activity takes place. It all seems to have stopped. And the Pritchards think it's gone away. They can't really explain it, but they're obviously happy it's over. Now, we're going to talk about this a bit later, but it's generally referred to as a poltergeist. And they're not often associated with causing bodily harm. Obviously, there are lots of films that will tell us different. But once the activity starts up again, Fred gets a little bit more violent. So Philip and Diane are now getting to their mid to late teens. I think Diane is 15. And the activity really focuses on her and reaches new heights. So her long hair would suddenly stand on its end. She was pulled from her bed by her hair, and most worrying of all, she was pinned to the wall by furniture that was actually heavy enough to crush her, though it didn't crush her, it just trapped her against the wall, and she escaped that relatively unscathed. It was around this time that Jean and Joe also became aware of a black figure standing over their bed. Now, some neighbours say that it was at this point that Joe moved out. I think perhaps the children went to stay with him a bit. I'm not entirely sure. There's not a lot of info about the Pritchard family. Again, we'll go into that later. But the straw that Jean originally says she's not going to be moved. It's her house. She's a tough Yorkshire woman. You don't mess with a Yorkshire woman. And she's not going to be moved out of her house for anything. But the straw that breaks the camel's back for her is when Diane is dragged, kicking and screaming, up the stairs by her hair and her throat. And after that, she's not only seriously traumatised, but they could clearly see visible finger marks on her throat. And it was then, I think, that Jean had had enough and decided to move out. But it wasn't just the Pritchard family who were witnessing this phenomena. Local police officers, politicians, and clergy claimed to have witnessed strange goings on. Even the bus drivers said that they would have people who went on the bus just to go past the house, as it was on a regular bus route. The neighbours also said they experienced things and saw phenomena for themselves. They talk about how it affected their houses, but one neighbour says that while the Pritchards were out, she saw all sheets and bedding being thrown out of one of the windows, and the Pritchards arrived home and they all just watched as things were being chucked out of the window. And then one of the uncles went into the house and it was empty. There was no one there. So the history of what was going on wasn't really uncovered until a researcher interested in the history of the Cluniac monks in the region started doing some research. The Cluniac order was basically the first attempt at monastic reform in the 11th century. So they wanted to keep the priories free from social politics and the feudal system. So they set up a network so that affiliated monasteries could report directly to the Cluny Abbey. And one of these houses was established in Pontefract. And it's believed that the house on 30 East Drive was situated on the site of historic civil battles, and paranormal investigators suggest that this is the residual energy from these battles and the volume of the violent deaths that occurred that may explain the poltergeist activity. It's also believed that the Cluniac monastery hanged a monk monk in the 15th century for the rape and murder of a young girl in the village. Some people say that the girl was about the same age as Diane. Obviously, that's speculation. And the gallows at which the monk was executed was directly opposite the house. So this claim has been widely disputed, but the apparitions witnessed by the Pritchards and their friends and family refer to the manifestation as a dark, hooded figure in the house. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation. Is it because they've described it as a dark, hooded figure that people are then saying, oh, it must be a monk? Or did they hear history of a monk and then see the apparition as a dark, hooded figure? Or are they making the whole thing up? So there's this description, which I'm going to read out, which is taken from a neighbour. So one morning, Mrs. Mountain, who lived in the adjoining property, was at her kitchen sink when she felt someone standing behind her. She had heard no one come in and assumed that it was her nephew who had sneaked in to make her jump. She said something like, "Oh, give over." That's my best Yorkshire accent. And looked around, and she found herself looking at a tall figure dressed in a black monk's habit with a cowl over the head. Its position prevented her from seeing the face. She told me that it looked quite solid and that, oddly enough, she felt no fear, only curiosity, and then it vanished. So Fred now becomes known as the Black Monk of Pontefract, and the house famous with numerous ghost hunters, mediums and TV crews going to see what phenomena they can record. They even made a film based on the house, which is called When the Lights Go Out, which is released in 2012. Now, it's very loosely based. I have obviously been digging deep and looking at forums and stuff, and it's amazing how many people say, well, actually, no, if you see the film, you'll see that this happened. The film is fictional, but it's based on a book by a man called Colin Wilson, and I think the book's called Poltergeist. I haven't read it, but it's his is a supposedly non-fiction account of 30 East Drive, and it was the book that was in the inspiration for the film. Now, after shooting the film, one of the directors sees that this house is for sale. It's been empty since the Pritchards moved out. And he buys it. It's going cheap, and he buys it. And he basically buys it originally as a stunt for the launch of the film. He runs a red carpet up to the door, and the first screening is held in the house. Now it's run as a sort of B&B, even though it's recommended that you don't stay there. And it's basically just available to rent for your own ghost hunting. There are lots of different ghost hunting tours that go there. And some people say they've experienced loads. Some people say they've experienced nothing and it's just house creaking noises. Some people say that when the monk allegedly raped and murdered the girl, he threw her into a well, and that the well is underneath the house. And if the well is underneath the house, that has two things. Firstly, you're going to hear loads of noises. There's going to be a whole different kind of movement in the house, so there is that. But secondly, people who study the paranormal believe that water gives energy to spirits, so that could be another explanation if it is built on the well. So yeah, if you want to go ghost hunting at 30 East Drive, you absolutely can. There's loads of places that you seem to be able to book tickets, but there is 30 East Drive, a website where you can also look at different photos and footage that people have taken. So the problem I have with the Black Monk is it doesn't really fit with the traditional idea of what a poltergeist is. So poltergeist is a German word that can literally be translated as rumbling or noisy, polter, and then geist is spirit or ghost. Author Erin Thompson defines them as a seriously difficult to define phenomenon. A poltergeist is most often described as an unusual form of energy produced from most often by a young person. though ghost or demon possession may function as the root cause. Typically, the perception of the poltergeist is of a playful trickster. The entity or energy doesn't seek to actively harm an individual, but merely create loud attention in an almost childlike fashion. As the manifestation of energy is thought to stem from the presence of a distressed youngster, this perception of a loud but harmless entity persists in a dramatic interpretations of alleged cases within popular culture. So though this would fit with Diane being the focus of the poltergeist activity, it wouldn't be a specific thing like the Black Monk. You wouldn't necessarily see poltergeist activity with an apparition, if that makes sense. So it's also understood that poltergeist activity runs for a limited time. So if, as it's believed, it's the result of an unusual form of energy that's coming from a distressed teen or a distressed person that has built up this energy and it's sort of causing it to happen outwardly, then energy runs out. You can't run a race forever. You can't sprint forever. So poltergeists have a limited time and then the activity stops, but it doesn't stop at 30 East Drive. It pauses for 2 years. No one knows why, and the Pritchards seem to live happily there quietly for 2 years. But then it continues unabated, and by all accounts the house is still very active today, depending on who you speak to. But we saw this as well in the case of Hinton Ampner, which I think we did in about episode 4. So if you haven't listened to that and this is your jam, then go and give it a listen. But the activity there continued for years. So there's a few things. Obviously, the Pritchards often, with alleged paranormal activity or poltergeist activity, it turns out to be a stunt from a family member or someone wanting to get attention or needing more attention in the home. I find it weird if that's what the Pritchards were up to, that they would stop for 2 years and then carry on. I don't know why they would choose to pause it. You either stop or you carry on. I don't know. But they left and it remained empty ever since. And it's now called, in lots of places, the most haunted house in England, which originally the title was given to Borley Rectory, which I've also covered. And yeah, you can go on a ghost hunt there if you choose. And there's just hundreds of images and loads of video footage to see on the internet, which you can go and have a look at, and some of which I will share on our Instagram. But, you know, I'm skeptical of everything unless I see it for myself. So there's lots of images that show face in the window, faces in mirrors, seems to happen a lot. Someone has footage of what is believed to be a monk's arm at the bottom of the stairs. But all of this can be created nowadays. It's no great shakes to alter images and make your own. It seems to be a nice little business running out of this house right now. So that is the story of 30 East Drive and the Black Monk of Pontefract. There's, for those who are fans, TV's Most Haunted with Yvette Fielding and her husband Carl, who are heroes of mine, I have to say. When I was pregnant with my first son, my brain left the building and all I could do was watch Most Haunted episodes, and it was fantastic. I loved Yvette and Carl. I was emotionally involved in their relationship, and it brought me much joy. And I then, when my mother came to look after the dog when I was in labour, I made her watch it. And then that night she had a nightmare that she was being held down by ghosts, and she screamed so loudly that all our dogs ran in and jumped on her bed and started licking her face. It just sounded very hilarious. So I enjoyed watching Yvette and Carl in action. I think None of it's real in Most Haunted, I have to say. Don't want to do Yvette and Carl down. They've done me a great service, but there seems to be there's just loads of footage of paranormal investigations happening there. And again, unless I'm there, I'm very skeptical, because sometimes old houses make noises. Any house can make a settling noise. You never know if it's someone off camera doing things. One thing I would say is, if they did trickery, they've got a locked off camera in a room, and they've put loads of ping pong balls on the floor that then move in a very random way. And that was very well done. If they faked that, that was well done, because I couldn't see where, the hairdryer was or whatever it was they were using. So yeah, there's loads to check out. If a spooky house is your jam, then 30 East Drive, that you can scroll through many a photo. And what I really like is the guy who owns it now has just left it in its 70s glory. So it's also something to look at if you are a fan of old school interiors. It's pretty special. And that is the story of 30 East Drive. I want to know where your favourite haunted place is, so I can have a look. Quite often the evidence and the information on haunted houses is very little, so they suit minisodes better, unless it's somewhere like Borley Rectory, which has got a whole ton of it. As always, I love to hear your recommendations, so please send me a message. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook, where we are at The Monday Night Revue. You can send me an email, themondaynightrevue@gmail.com. And please go and check out our Patreon, where there are lots of short stories. There's a few different tiers you can choose from, going from just getting every episode ad-free to getting your stories read out on the podcast, and loads of free content and things. So go and check it out. I think we're Patreon/Monday Night Revue. And remember, review is spelled REVUE. And until next time, stay safe, be kind, and always check the back seat before you drive.